All of the food we eat and much of the clothing we wear comes from plants and animals that are raised on farms. Farms are different in type, in size, and even in name.
Welcome to Barn Talk. What happens at the barn stays in the barn, but not today. We're going to let it all out for you guys. Today is a very, very special episode and very special day. It is Veterans Day, and I want to take this time to thank all of the active service members and veterans out there in this country that laid down the ultimate sacrifice for us here at home to enjoy the freedoms that we've been able to enjoy for so long, and what's made us an amazing country, the best country in the entire world for so long. And I had two grandpas that served, one at Vietnam, one in World War II, and a lot of craziness that they both had to endure. And I try to, when I'm going through a situation in my life, I think back to my grandpas and what they had to go through, and that gives me a lot of perspective some days when I think that I'm going through something challenging or I'm going through a stressful situation. Nothing compares to what they had to endure, and any active member probably has had something similar happen to them, or any veteran can probably identify with that. And I think that this is a day that needs to be celebrated more, and more people need to appreciate what they got, because without those people, none of this would be possible. So thank you if you served.
Yes, I second that to those, all that have served or continue to serve. Thank you. We appreciate it. We are very blessed in the fact that there are people out there that answer that call and keep us all safe, and that is more of a problem, I feel like, every day. And we're in kind of a tough time right now. There's a lot of division in this country, and our guest today, he served during the Vietnam War and has a great story. I guess I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag, but he also, grew up in a time, a lot of division, and there was a lot of division in the country over that conflict. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about lessons that maybe we learned or didn't learn, and some that we may have to learn again. So he's a farm kid from Southwest Iowa.
I got one last thing before we get into it. The fee for today, because I always say share the show, but the fee today is to tell a veteran thank you for their service. Thank some veterans, thank active duty members for their service. That's the fee for today's show. So if you get any value, or actually if you get no value, which that's not going to happen, you're going to get a lot of value from this one, but just that's the fee. Go tell a veteran, go tell somebody that's serving active duty, thank them for their service. So without further ado, let's get into it. Garry Roberts, welcome to Barn Talk. We appreciate you coming on, and I want to give you two thank yous, because this is going to air on Veterans Day next week. So I want to say thank you for your service, and also thank you for supporting Farmer Grade. You ended up buying a box for our first drop.
Sure. And
that was pretty awesome. So you swung by the warehouse and bought a box and supported us. So I just wanted to say thank you, and we're excited to get this one going. So,
yeah, I'm glad to be here, and it's Veterans Day, and I know in a sense you're honoring me, but we're honoring all veterans, and hopefully we can hit on some things today that will shed light on the men, what veterans have going on in their head, and in their lives. So
yeah, absolutely. So let's go back a little bit. You Midwest kid, where'd you grow up at?
Yeah, we grew up in Southwest Iowa, down in Montgomery County, a little town called Villisca.
Yep.
Down on Highway 71. Most people know it as the axe murder. Has the axe murder house in it,
That's right.
And over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I graduated high school down there, which let me pause there and say that so people wonder, well, how old is this guy anyway? Well, let's give you a little bit of a clue. In September, we had our 55th high school reunion.
Okay.
And I'm a slow learner, but I'm slowly learning how to handle those reunions. Of course, my wife went with me, and I've learned when you start talking to classmates, you keep on the move. You don't spend a lot of time with one, and you do male and female. But I almost got in trouble talking too long to
too few.
To some of them.
Yep.
And so, but I did a lot better than I've done in the past. So we're the next day we're traveling and traveling back home, and we're talking about the reunion and who I saw. She didn't graduate there, so she didn't know them, very many of them. And she says, "Well, I think I probably rated in the top 3." And like an idiot, I answered it wrong. And it wasn't really a question. That was just a statement.
That was just a statement.
That was a statement, but I thought I was going to have to. I responded. And I said, "Yeah, I think you're right." And I knew I had done wrong. That was the wrong answer. Because
she baited you a little bit.
Because the next question that came says, "Well, who was 1 and 2?" We slowly learned
that's right.
how to handle those situations.
She's pretty sharp. She baited you on that one.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, it's easy for her to do that. She does a good job of it. But anyway, I grew up in little 10 miles north of town on a diversified farm, as good most of them were back in those days.
Yep.
It had been 3 generations that farm had been in the family, and being Southwest Iowa, it's kind of rolling and hilly, and a lot of pasture and timber. Maybe 100, close to 200 acres in row crop was probably all there was, but a lot of hay ground. So we had dairy. 12 to 15, usually that we tended to. At least 125, sometimes up to 150 ewes for sheep that we took care of. Well, it's a year-round deal, but in the winter it's really busy.
Yep.
And I can't tell you how many hogs we had. I know in the 70s when I went back to the farm for a little bit, we had 100 sows in a couple of old hog houses, and we were doing 2 ways, farrow to finish or selling 40-pounders.
Yep.
But and then about 20 beef cows. So it was a busy time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Busy on that old farm. It was, and we worked for as long as I can remember. I can remember having chores and responsibilities. Probably one of the first things I did was hauling wood to the house to heat with, and we were. I don't know, maybe we were kind of backward in a way. I was a junior in high school when we put in the first gas furnace.
Sure.
Until then, you cut wood in the fall and split, and I packed it to the house. And
how many brothers and sisters?
So I had, there's five kids.
Yep.
I had a sister that's 4 years older, a brother 3, and then and a sister that's 5 years younger, and one that was 11 years younger.
Sure.
And we all participated. We traded off. Up at 5:30 in the morning, one of us would be our day to help milk the cows, and go out with Dad, and you'd feed the calves and separate the cream from the milk and bring the cattle into the stanchions, and the next day it'd be another one. You do that night too.
Yep.
If you weren't doing the cows, then you either wash the dishes or you dry the dishes. So the folks used us completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
For as much as they.
Yeah, it was a group effort.
Much as they could. There's a couple chores I had to do that I was thinking about. What was want to be some of the least desirable. One of them was a stationary grinder that you had to shovel with a steel scoop shovel. I don't know if we ever had an aluminum one. A steel scoop shovel, ear corn into a grinder.
Yep.
And there was always corn and cobs popping back out of that thing and noisy. When you got that done, you pulled over next to the barn, you scooped it into the granary in the barn so you could feed the milk cows when they come in. Yep. So that was a tough one. But even tougher yet was cleaning the brooder house, the chicken house.
Oh, I'm sure.
Boy.
Wood floor.
Oh, yeah. I'm
tight.
sure. So did you bed them with corn cobs?
I think probably,
Yeah.
well, maybe sometimes, but I think there were a lot of times it was straw because it.
Oh,
if
sure.
I can picture it on the fork coming, but the ammonia that come off of that, that's
yeah.
what would kill you. So, but it was a good. it was a good life. Us kids didn't know we lacked for anything. Didn't ever seem to be any extra money around. There was plenty of food and plenty of work. And I think if there's all of the Roberts kids are hard workers.
Yep.
And I think that was instilled into us. If we're part of the family, we're going to contribute.
Yep.
And there's pluses and minuses, I suppose, but it served me well through the years.
Yeah.
To have that kind of farm kid mentality when it comes to doing a job.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what year did you graduate high school?
68.
68. So, as you started your senior year in high school, there was a lot of upheaval and there was a lot going on in the country. And what year did the draft start?
That didn't start until 1970.
70.
Well, I take that back. The lottery started in 70. The draft was already in place.
Yes.
And the draft was, each county had a draft board.
Yep.
And they had a list of names and how they sorted them out. I don't know, because there were deferments,
Yep.
And for college deferments and so forth. And in 70, because there was there'd been politics involved as far as who got selected to go.
Yep.
And parents would be upset and raising a fuss, and they raised fuss with congressmen. Congress passed the lottery that was based on, the draft that was based on lottery.
Yeah.
They pulled, and
randomly.
That's where I got it. That's where I ended up getting. I had a low number and went right away then.
So you when did you get drafted?
What age?
I was 19.
You had graduated high school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unlike World War II, where they took a lot of them right out of high school, I understand, or, before you even finished.
So
did you have any desires? Like, what were you going to do? Did you have any idea what you were going to do before that?
I did. The last 2 years of high school, I took a college prep class. I never was much of a student. Working in school was never a priority in the family, and so we just kind of bummed along a little bit. But I got serious the last couple of years and started taking some college prep classes. And we had a lot of timber ground. We spent a lot of time down there cutting trees and making saw logs and splitting hedge posts, or not hedge posts, but it'd been oak posts. Yeah. And a couple of, there's three of us that we spent our summers in a little shack down in the middle of the timber. And so I got a real liking for a career that would be in the forest industry somehow, production or preservation or something. That really interested me. And so I 4-H, in 4-H, there was a forestry projects, and met with the county forester several times and did some different activities. That really interested me. And so when I got at the end of high school, I told my dad that I was interested in going to school down at the community college. It's about 25 miles down the road. And he said, well, it's a lot easier to get in than it is to stay in, and then walked off. And there I stood.
Yep.
And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't have the wherewithal to go ahead and make it happen.
Yep.
Somewhat intimidated most of my life anyhow. And so I dropped that thought at that point. And I knew that that there probably would be, and the Army was probably in my future. So what am I going to do until then? Yeah. Well, I had some livestock, and I think Dad I think he always thought that I would probably stay on the farm. I never really ever put a lot of thought into it. Yep. And I remember my grandmother would ask me, well, are you going to farm? And, nobody's said anything. If they'd have said something, maybe I would have. Yep. But the lack of communication is not good when a kid is that age, and and you haven't developed the communication skills to that point. So that was kind of a hindrance. So I had, and I think what makes me think that he thought I would probably gradually grow into being on the farm is that he never really ever paid me any cash, but I had a couple of sows.
Oh, sure.
Sold the pigs, that's my money. And I had a couple dairy, and I had some sheep. And so I worked through the summer after high school, and then at the end of the year, I sold my livestock and decided I needed to. I didn't see a future there right then. A friend of mine had worked for a steel building company and made some pretty good money, and I said, well, I'm just going to give them a call and see what I can do, and I did. And I went up to Atlantic, and there was two guys that had a company. They weren't even 30 years old yet, and they were building buildings all over the country, and so I went to work for them. Knowing that the draft may become my future. I really enjoyed the building trade. I was pretty tough anyway, from 5-gallon buckets and scoop shovels. We didn't have augers. We used scoop shovels to fill our hog feeders.
Yep.
And the one thing that taught me, as well as let me back up. Between my junior and senior year, the workload was so heavy that I went to town one time. I went down to the John Deere store and I bought a radio and put on my 8N Ford tractor. Okay. Yep. Now I knew all the songs, the top 40.
Yep.
But I was on the thing constantly. We're mowing and raking and baling and doing this. And when it come to grind and feed, we'd grind at that old hammer mill. You'd scoop out of the box car and 5 scoops of corn, 1 scoop of protein, and however you did it back in those days. Then you went to the hog lot and you scooped out of that thing. Well, you'd think, well, you're never going to get done with a scooping this big old barge box scooping it out, but you just keep going. You learn to park to the winds and your advantage, and away you go. Next thing you know, you're down to the floor, and pretty soon you're scraping the corner. It's mission accomplished, and you really felt an accomplishment through all that hard work. Whether it was mowing a huge hayfield or whether it was filling the feeders, and it gave me perseverance. Is what it did.
Served you well.
I'm going to hang right in here, and it's the satisfaction is going to be when I get done. The only dissatisfaction would have been if the pigs had ate the valve stem off the tire. You know how that goes. Kept having to shoo them away. Yep. But anyway, I was there. I stayed till the end, and I went to Atlantic to build steel buildings. Now I was close enough. It's only I don't know whether it was 30 miles or not. But one thing interested me about it, we was gone all week, and just home on the weekends, and it was this is the scary part that maybe it's a life lesson for somebody, but I really wasn't welcome to come home and just hang out or eat the folks' groceries or use the laundry, and which that's never been my philosophy. The prodigal son came home because he had a home to come home to.
Yeah, right.
And so I was put at risk in a sense in that way. But I found places to stay and good or bad, or slept in my car. I did something. So but it wasn't the best. It just wasn't the best situation.
Sure.
But we worked in what was really interesting about that. I started to say that through all the labor, and then you throw that on top of building steel buildings, and the philosophy was hustle, 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 let's go, and you're just going on a dead run constantly. Yep. And by the time I was drafted and went, I was one tough little booger.
You were in good shape.
I was in good shape.
Basic wasn't.
No, that wasn't a piece. That wasn't a bother. So we worked in and we were in Rugby, North Dakota, Dickinson, Bismarck, South Dakota, Eagle Butte, St. Joe, Missouri, Clay Center, Nebraska.
Sure.
All over Iowa. And some of those jobs are just 1 week jobs. Some would be 2, some would be a little bit longer. We were working in one in Pipestone, Minnesota. Both crews were there, and they were going to draw for the draft, for the lottery for the draft. So we all we gathered around one room in a motel and was watching, and my number came up. It was number 24. And they'll say all hooted and hollered, and Roberts is gone, And because in a small town, that's probably going to come pretty early.
Yeah.
So I had stopped back by home there in either late December or 1st January, and there was a letter from the President of the United States,
Sure.
Richard M. Nixon. You have been selected.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Mother asked me if I was, I don't know, scared or nervous, or I think she probably was just, if I was nervous about it, probably what she said. And I said, "Oh no, not too bad." And I left. Quite frankly, inside I was excited.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was my opportunity
Yeah.
to give back to my country.
Yep.
And I had watched others through the years. We talk about somebody was gone to the Army or they're back from the Army, and to me it was a common thing. Everybody should do it.
Yeah.
I don't think today everybody should do it. Quite frankly, you should have a desire.
Yep.
I mean, I'm okay with the volunteer Army, but
Yep.
but I was excited to get that letter to go. And then in February 5th of 1990, my wife, my girlfriend, she's my wife now, and my mother took me over to Red Oak to meet the bus bright and early in the morning, and there was only one other person on the bus. It must have been chartered just for us, as far as I know. And we said our goodbyes and waved goodbye, and I sat in the back of the bus. When I got my composure after a while, I went back up to talk to the guy up front, and it was Al Berganzel. Al Berganzel I knew from, he was in a different school district, same county, but I knew him from 4-H county fairs.
Yep.
I'd met him down there and talked to him once. And so we visited. He joined the draft. He had number 61. He joined the draft thinking that he would get a better position, a better job. Well,
Oh, sure.
when he told me that, I says, "Yeah, well, see how that works out for you," you know.
Yeah.
But we decided to stay together and process through together. So we went to the induction center and went through that, and we did end up in the same basic training company down in Fort Leonard Wood.
Fort Leonard Wood.
And
yeah.
he was a B, I was an R last name, so he was in one platoon, I was in another. They just split you up alphabetically.
Yep.
We would see each other occasionally, and one of the biggest regrets that I have is that later on during basic, on a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday noon, if you had family there, you could leave and have a meal with them. And his folks asked me a couple different times to go with them, and I turned them down. And
Wish you would have. Yeah.
And I regret that today.
Yeah.
So you gotta think what if, I guess, sometimes.
Yep.
But we went through basic together, and
I got a question for
Go
you.
ahead.
So what was the feeling between young guys when you're sitting there listening to the radio or watching TV, whatever it was? What was the feeling around most young people your age, young guys your age? Were they a lot of them like you in the fact that they were excited to serve their country, or was it more because that's a controversial conflict? So
Yeah.
you had a lot of people that didn't like it. You had a lot of people that were willing to sign up or willing to go and be excited for it. What was the feeling you?
I think the feeling was, what can I do to get out of it? Get
Yeah.
out of going.
Yeah.
most
That was
people?
the most of. Working in some of the guys that worked around and some of their friends, there was talk about you're gonna shoot your toe off, or you're gonna do stupid stuff like
Yeah.
that. I'm gonna burn my draft card. I mean, that was prevalent. They didn't have the same a good share of those didn't have the same attitude that I had, and I just kept it to myself. Anyway, but that's and a lot of them would join another branch of the service. They'd join the National Guard. A lot less chance of being called up. If they knew they had to go anyway, they would make sure that they kept in good standings in school so they wouldn't have to go. But
Yep.
generally, that's the way it was. There wasn't anybody looking to go, and I wasn't looking to go to war necessarily. I was looking to serve my country,
Yeah.
wherever they wanted to put me. My brother had gone to Germany, and he's just 3 years older. Very well could have ended up in Vietnam like I did, but I think what happened was, and along about 68, that same time frame when I got out, that's when the Tet Offensive was, when the North was they rolled over several big cities
Yep.
in the South. I read there was 60,000 North Vietnamese soldiers killed in that. Well, January went clear to September actually, and about 2,700 of our guys, our American soldiers. But it was and you would think that would be, well, we've got the upper hand of this thing. We're going to be able to bring it to a conclusion here pretty soon. But it had for some reason, it had the opposite effect. It turned more people opposed to that conflict or that war. Now, being in high school, not paying much attention to the news, I didn't pay much attention.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just know I'm going to serve my country. If that's where they send me, fine.
Yeah.
And but the most everybody just was looking for, that I knew, were just looking for ways to get out or go to a branch that would be a lot safer.
Yeah.
So it's all personal safety is what they were looking at.
So how many weeks basic is that?
That was I think it's an 8 week, I believe, and there's a week of processing on the way in.
Yep.
And in that processing, we took an aptitude test, sure. And that one was interesting. I tried doing well in the electronics part, because my brother was in the radio communications, and so I want to be like my brother, Yep. And I kind of bombed out on that one. But they had asked questions about how often do you fish? Do you like hunting? And how much camping have you done in the last year? I knew how to answer those.
Yep.
I probably looked like a sissy when it come to those kind of questions.
Yeah.
And then they had counseling after that, and they said, Private Roberts, you've qualified for aircraft helicopter mechanics. Maintenance, but it can't guarantee it to you unless you sign up for another year. And I said, well, I'm just here for 2 years. I won't be signed up for another year. Yeah. He says, well, you'll probably end up in the infantry then. I said, but just for 2 years, right? And they said, right. So that's why we left it.
Okay.
And that leads to another story. When we were out on bivouac and marched out. It was like a 3-day affair, and a rucksack and the whole thing, and weapons. And we were bivouacked in an area the second night, had a battle buddy, set up her little 2-man tent, and perimeter was all set. And a word had been put out that there would be it was 50% alert. Every other man had to be up. So there's going to be some kind of a attack that night from the opposite force. And I had a radio, battery operated transistor radio. It was contraband, but I had it anyway, and I'd had it all the way through probably 6 or 7 weeks. Somebody finally stole it, but I had it for a long time. I used to keep it in my pillow, and at night I would get WHB, I think, out of Kansas City, and listen to it. And just, it was secured under my pillow, so it was in good place. Well, I took it with me out on bivouac, and had some downtime when I went. It was in March. I went down from our perimeter a little bit, and the sun was shining against the trees, and just really comfortable there. And I just sat down to soak up some sun and listen to the radio a little bit. And then heard a weather forecast. They talked about severe thunderstorms that night for that area. And then I heard some voices, and I shut the radio off and got down. And I looked, and there was a drill sergeant and a maintenance training officer coming down a trail on the back side of our bivouac area. And I kept secured until they left, and I went up back to my company area and found my battle buddy, and I told him, I said, there's rain coming tonight. We need to be able to get sleep up off the ground here. Yeah. So I found a pallet. And then I found a little, some strong barn steel and a couple of 4x4s. I scrounged up and we got those fit inside of our tent. And I said, at least the water will run under us tonight when it rains. Yep. And then I got notified, me and probably a half a dozen others, to go to the command tent. So we go up there, and they told us to go stand over there and sit over there in the corner until we're ready. And they were having a meeting. Well, I think they were probably planning that attack for that night, probably. Yeah. But where they had us go set, that's where pyrotechnics was laying there. And so into my field jacket pocket went a trip flare. And when they found out what the meeting was about, well, one thing the reason they called us up there was that we had to go in that night on the chow truck and go the next day to the hospital and take a flight physical. So, so there's a chance I won't be in the infantry yet here.
Yeah.
And so then I went back down to that trail where I saw the commander earlier, the training officer earlier, strung that wire across that trail, and didn't tell anybody at all. And got on the chow truck that night, rode in. Sure enough, it rained cats and dogs. We was in a tin building, and the rain just beating on that roof. I was laying there high and dry.
Yeah, glad to not be in that
Bennett
tent.
told me the next day that he was glad we had that pallet in there because he'd just been soaked if he hadn't have. But so we got our physical done, rode out on the noon chow truck, and they dropped us off where the guys were road marching to their next location. And so I got in line with our platoon, and it was like this dark cloud hanging over that place. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "The guys are pretty quiet." And he said, "Well, nobody's had any sleep." He said, "Some son of a gun put a trip flare across." And the drill sergeants had us up all night. They were going to find out who put that trip flare in place.
Yep.
And I said, "Oh, that's all right."
Who was that son of a bitch?
Yeah, I didn't. I had never told anyone that.
Yeah,
I've told one guy since that story because
That's pretty good.
They were just beat up.
Yeah,
They were letting them have it.
All night. Well, I think it's pretty good when you can beat them at their own game.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the idea. You got to think.
Yeah.
That's
Got to think. So
you get through basic, and what's the process before you go overseas?
well, you went to advanced training.
Yeah.
And that was in Fort Rucker, Alabama.
Okay.
And so we would have gone down there early April. And there was two parts to that. There was the basic maintenance, basic aircraft maintenance, and they flunked out 3 or 4 at that point. So there's only about 10 of us left. And then you specialized into a model of helicopters. So I was in the Huey helicopters then.
So you ended up
not going the infantry route.
infantry.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And
No.
so you were on the path that
I was, well, yeah. Well, I had to pass that flight physical,
Yep.
which is, it's sight and hearing are real important on that.
Yep.
And are the big things on that. When my orders came before we got out of basic training, then I had the orders to go to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and that's where the aviation training was. That's where they trained the pilots and the mechanics. I'll tell you, I'll back up one thing on that basic training. When I got those orders, everything was real lax the last day or so of basic training with the drill sergeants that were just semeing along, which they bothered to be quite 2 or 3 weeks. I thought I was in a communist country, quite frankly. I thought I took a wrong turn someplace. Yep. But after 2 or 3 weeks, it lightened up a little bit. Only they just pull stupid stuff on you. So it was a joke to see what they're going to pull on us today, because they're not going to kill us.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think.
Yeah.
But they're going to work us. They're going to work us hard. But anyway. Yeah. But we got to the last day or so, and they were back to human. They're all of them were combat veterans, Vietnam combat veterans. And this one tall drill sergeant had a small group around him in the edge of the parking lot. I went over to see what they were talking about, and he was telling me, he says, I knows where most of you boys are going. I've been there. Not everybody comes home.
Yeah.
And he said, if you wonder why we were so tough on you, because we want you to be able to think on your feet. We want you coming home.
Yep.
And man, that was one of the best sermons I ever heard.
Yep.
From to understanding why you have to have the discipline and why you have to have the kind of training that you do have. And so I was impressed. He impressed me, but to take time to do that. And so as we were breaking up, Al Berganza was there, my buddy Al, and he'd gotten orders to go to artillery, going to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and artillery. Was pretty disappointed about that and bothered him some about that. It wasn't what he expected. But they're not going to look and see whether you volunteered to get in the draft or you were drafted. You're just in the draft.
Yeah, you're just a number.
It don't matter if you're regular Army.
Yep.
If this where they need you, it's where you're going. It's where you're going.
Yep. And
so that was we said our goodbyes, and that was the last time I seen him.
Yep.
So
you
went to Alabama. And that was a pretty good experience. Our orders were slow coming, so we were just doing details for a couple of weeks. I think it had to have been very end of July, and had a 2-week leave to go home, and then orders to fly to Fort Lewis, Washington to ship out from there.
Yeah.
So I came home. Pam and I spent a lot of good times together. My dad had talked me into selling my '64 Chevy Impala convertible while I was in basic training.
Yep.
And it wasn't hurting anything. Well, so I got home, I couldn't use his car, so I had to go buy something.
Yep.
So I went Spiker Chevrolet and bought an old Chevy 62 Chevy 2, little 6-cylinder.
Yep.
And we puttered around in that thing for 2 weeks and before I left. One of the strange things that it's hard to, I still have the orders at home in things I cannot take to Vietnam. And they issued you white T-shirts for basic training and your training. I had to dye them green.
Yeah, I couldn't take them.
Yep, had to dye them green to go. Nowadays, I think the clothiers, whoever's supplying the Army, they're making so much money, they just keep continuing to change uniforms constantly. Yep. But back in those days, you had to take your old whiteys and dye them. I don't remember whether the underwear were dyed too. I can't recall. But so could you imagine how many different shades of green showed up over there?
Oh, yeah.
It would have been different.
Oh, man.
So I got to Fort Lewis, and a guy I was in high school with was an MP out there, and somehow no cell phones. How in the world how we communicated, I don't know. But I gave him a call. He came down, and we had a couple of beers together, and that was good to see a local, somebody from home down there. Well, the 10 guys that I went to school with, the maintenance school with, all had their orders for Vietnam also, and we were there at the same time. And every once in a while, I'd hear them they'd call off a roster for somebody to get in line to, this is going to be a load
to ship out,
and they'd be together. And I thought, well, man, what's it take to do that? I want to go with somebody that I know.
Yep.
So in the roster that I was on, they called one of the guys that I knew, one of the rosters, and then he called for a Garry Roberts. I said, right here. And I'd run up there, and he'd look at my ID, and he says, no, it's Garry Roberts, not Roberts. And I did that a couple times, but I never made it. So I ended up going by myself.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, yeah. We flew, fueled up in Alaska, and then on into Cam Ranh Bay down in Vietnam. That's where I think most of them all went into, and they went in. And the smell was just terrible. And it was that way for 13 months. And
no kidding.
Yeah, that's the first thing that hit me was the smell. And I don't know whether they didn't have burn pits, they had burn barrels, whether it was that or being on the coast,
the humidity,
close to the ocean and the humidity. The other thing that surprised me was the number of Vietnamese that were there. I'm thinking, I don't trust any of these Vietnamese, civilians that were working for the Army.
Yeah.
And that were there. That was one of the things that surprised me. And then they had here again, you're processing in, and they're just assigning numbers to wherever they need what. So they need a mechanic, and on K, I'm a mechanic. So that's where I'm going to go.
Here's where you're going.
And they listed on a bulletin board, they listed where you're going and what your instructions were, where to be to catch a flight there. And guys were looking at that, and they would say, well, I'm going to Phu Bai, and clap. Oh yeah, this is going to be great. And then somebody say on K, and they say, oh, wouldn't want to go there. Well, that's where my name was.
Okay.
And it was kind of a pit. The 4th Division was in on K, and B Company, 4th Aviation. It was a hunter-killer team. They had Cobra helicopters and Loach, and what they called Loach, OH-6 Loach, and OH-58 helicopters for observation helicopters, and then they had the Cobra gunships. So they'd require the different ways they did it, but generally a pilot and a gunner or crew chief, I guess they'd call him, on the observation helicopter, goes down looking for the bad guy.
Yep.
And then the gunships would roll in when they find something. And that's the kind of unit I was in. I was just a mechanic there, and I worked. We worked in the hangar, kind of regular, long but regular day hours, and it wasn't but probably a month or so, and I was put on an unscheduled maintenance team. So we had a truck and 2 mechanics, an arms man, and an aviation electronics guy, avionics, and we would see the missions off in the morning, and they were back for fuel midday or late morning, we'd be there, and then they'd go back out again. It's got kind of a routine to it, but it was you were off any additional details, the guard duty and KP and all those things that had to be done. So that was a pretty good gig. I messed it up. I mouthed off to an NCO and lost that privilege, but the maintenance officer liked me, and he had been enlisted, and then he went to flight school, and so he was our maintenance test pilot, and he put me on second shift, and that was a sham job too there.
Because there was nothing going on.
I was off of details again. Well, what was going on was that was in September, early August, September, October. In November, the 4th Division stood down, Vietnamization. We're turning this war over to the South Vietnamese. And the 4th Division came back to Fort Carson, Colorado. We rounded up all of our equipment and shipped it off. I was involved in some of that, riding shotgun, taking stuff down to Quin Yon in order to put it on a ship to send it away. And so I still had time left in the service or in Vietnam. So I was sent to further up the coast, up in what they call I Corps, Chu Lai, to an assault helicopter company. It had, probably somewhere around 20 plus, maybe 25 Huey helicopters that were H model, D model, H model, transport helicopters. Yep. They took the troops in and out, supplies in and out, so forth. And then they had 8 helicopter gunships. They
had door gunners
that supported them. And each one would have a crew chief and a gunner and 2 pilots. And since I had been working on the Cobras down in Onke, they just put me with the Charlie model team, which was the gunship maintenance team. And so that was the second phase of my time there was just working on the Mike model and Charlie model gunships and that maintenance team. When I came into Onke, we came in through what they call a replacement center down right there on the South China Sea, and had a formation early in the morning, and I rolled out for that, and I hear a voice behind me say, "Roberts, what are you doing?" And here was a guy that I'd gone through basic training with. In fact, we were probably best friends in basic training. He was just Missouri hillbilly. He just bunked right across from me. He was standing behind me. Well, he'd gotten redeployed. He'd gotten reassigned too, and he's right behind me. So we had Thanksgiving dinner in that mess hall of that replacement company, and I still say every Thanksgiving, I say that was the best Thanksgiving dinner I ever had.
Yep.
Well, it was the company, and it was a good meal.
Yeah.
For an Army meal, that was pretty good.
Yep.
But Cecil and I kept in touch. He had been in an artillery unit, and when they transferred him, they messed up on the typewriter. I didn't look this up. I have looked that up before. I didn't look it up here this week. But they were one digit off, had changed one digit in his MOS. It's a number letter combination that tells your job's description. Made him a combat engineer.
Oh, jeez.
He says, "I'm not telling anybody. I'd much rather do that."
Yep.
than do the artillery. So he stayed. Now, what that looks like on his DD-214, where he changed MOSs,
yep,
beyond me. But that was a blunder, and he just stayed with it then. So I worked on the gunships, and I ended up on unscheduled maintenance again. To where I was working on aircraft between missions, even the transport helicopters, and I caught on to that. I caught on to the maintenance system and what the requirements were, to maintain them in top shape, and at times I'd had pilots, young pilots. They were all kids. I was still 19 years old. Yep. They'd come ask about what should I look for when I'm checking the tail rotor in the mornings, and I'd show him the details and which jam nuts and which safety wires, and I could explain it to him what to look for. and it made me feel pretty good to be able to do that. Well, I ended up on unscheduled maintenance again, where we work on gigs, problems with helicopters between missions.
Yep.
And as they go out. So I did that for quite a while. In about that same time, this is getting about toward February. My mother would keep in touch, and I got a letter from mother and opened it up, and here's Albert Genzel's obituary.
I'll be darned.
He was killed during Operation Lamson. An artillery piece got him, and so that weighed heavy on me. I didn't know Al real well, and that's why I wished I'd spent time with his parents.
Yeah.
And I guess to compound that, I could have went and saw him when I got home, but how do I do that?
Yeah.
I was uncomfortable with being able to do that.
Yeah.
And I visited the graveside in the last year, and I never seen him. So that was a shock to my mother, of course. And he had just been home for a 2-week leave, or 10-day leave. They had started allowing you leaves out of Vietnam, which were for a long time they weren't allowed at all. And she said, "Don't bother coming home. Just get your time done."
Yeah.
And come home. So they had a shortage of crew chiefs in the gunship platoon. And Rodriguez had taken a real high caliber round in the leg and really boogered him up and hit the aircraft. And it went in the fuel cell and out, but it didn't, no further damage. And one of the crew chiefs came to me and asked if I'd be interested in crewing his helicopter. And this wouldn't have been it wasn't necessarily a revenge thing, but I at that point, after being there for several months, I'd been 8 months altogether. I didn't really want to go home not seeing combat.
Yep.
I could have done my whole tour and never fired a weapon.
Yep.
And just worked in the hangar. And that would have been fine. And quite frankly, if you're in a position doing any job that's supporting the mission, to me that you're giving 100%.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to give 100% in a different way.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, sure, I'd like to, but I said I got to get released from maintenance to do that. Well, it happened to be that the maintenance NCO and my platoon sergeant were both on R&R. Okay. One was in Hawaii, one went to Australia, I think it was, and one went to Hawaii and met his family. And so I went to Captain Haskins and a maintenance officer, and I said, "Captain," I said, I've been working blah, blah, blah months, and I said, "I hope I've been doing you a good job." I said, "I've been given the opportunity to go to the flight platoon. They'd like to have somebody with some mechanical experience." So I said, "I just need your blessing to go." And he said, "Well, I think that'd be a great opportunity for you."
Yep.
And so I got out of there. And when Sergeant Walls and Sergeant Sargent got back, they said, "You'd have never got out of here if we'd have been here. We'd have kept you right here."
Yep.
Well, they like that old farm boy.
Yep.
Let's get the job done. Because when I'd work the unscheduled, when I got done, I'd go back to hangar and who needs help? Just the way it was. So I got in the flight platoon, took over crew chief on that aircraft, and I was pretty nervous the first day out, kind of half knowing what to do and what not. Didn't know when to load the machine gun, and we had rockets and minigun, and those are operated by the pilot and co-pilot. Always flew in pairs. There was a lead helicopter and a trail. Lead helicopter had just rockets. The trail had the minigun, so we could fire under them if they took fire. We had a little more flexibility. And I was in the left door, had a gunner in the right door. They sent me out was a crew chief, but he was on his way. He was about done. He was on his way home. He said he'd been there for 5 years. I can't imagine that. And he slept on the way out to the first mission. And I was scared to death.
It was old hat for him.
He was pretty callous to it.
Well, then the radio chatter started, and command helicopters talking to lead helicopter, and so he comes to, and he loads his machine gun, so I load mine up right away. And we were prepping an LZ.
Yep.
Rockets into an LZ, a little fire around the outside, making a place for troop carriers to come in. And there had been, I didn't have a lot of briefing ahead of time. Apparently there had been some activity in that area, and we didn't get the prepping done before we had activity already. And taking there was rounds coming. You could see tracer rounds coming up, and so we rolled in with always worth. And I had a successful day, the first day out, the first morning, and I was no longer scared. I had the power of the machine gun. It's a little naive to think that that's going to save you in every instance, but I was baptized by fire that first day, and never so glad that I had made the move to fly the guns.
Yeah.
My gunner, he just flew, the guy that flew gunner, he just flew one day. Then I had a friend that we had worked with in maintenance. He flew the second day with me. He shot a hole in my helicopter, and so I fired him. And they had another guy lined up to come in as the gunner, and Smiley came in. He was a finance clerk at Division.
Oh, wow.
But and that's where they got them. I mean, nowadays, I think they specifically train gunners, you know?
Yes, right.
But in those days, they took volunteers. Sometimes it was somebody in the infantry that wanted to come in out of the field and would fly.
Yeah.
But Smiley was an excellent gunner for me. And when I left, he ended up taking over responsibility for the aircraft as crew chief, which was pretty big step. But we flew together constantly. Then after that.
So weather permitting, did you fly every day?
Weather, no. We don't have the night vision that we had, that they have now, and so it's mostly day missions. It got to be, this is in 71.
Yep.
And the war had been going on for a long time, and so there was. Operations kind of took care of logistics, and we were in kind of a rotation. You'd be on a 24-hour standby if
something.
Well, escort a medevac or if someone was pinned down, rocket attack. You go out and try to find the tubes or whatever. You'd be on 5-minute standby for 24 hours. And since you were right there with your 2 aircraft ready to go, you were first up the next morning. Whatever combat assault mission there was, you were first up for that, and you'd fly that entire day. The next day, you might be on 5-minute standby, or not 5-minute, but 30-minute standby.
Yeah. And
you just needed to be available, and then you may have a day off.
Yeah.
Well, in those days, there wasn't really a day off because you had maintenance to do.
Sure.
There's 25-hour maintenance on the aircraft, 50-hour maintenance, and so there's always something to do. Occasionally, about twice, I remember having. Absolutely. Okay, I'm done for the day. I don't have
to do
I'm free today.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen very often. So it's kind of you just got into a system, got in a rotation. I haven't got time to go in this whole story. The 5-minute standbys, I can tell you about this here. Sometimes it was right there at our base at Chulai, which used to be a Marine base. For Marine jets, so everything was concrete and clean, and it was really nice facility up there. And sometimes it would be remote, like provincial capital was south at Quang Ngai, set down there, kind of in between some trees in an open area. And one time we were up at a soccer field at a little city up to the north, and we were up there on a standby. Mosquitoes were just eating us alive. No place to lay down. The pilot got priority. He got what room there was in the cargo area.
Yep.
Smiley was up on the rotor blades with his arms wrapped around it. And pilot and I was stretched out on top of the aircraft around the antennas,
Yeah.
But we got a radio call that there was Firebase Marianne was getting overrun. And so we crank up right away and off the ground we go, and we probably didn't go a quarter mile. You couldn't see anything. It was fogged in so bad. And so the pilots communicated, and we managed to get our way back down and sat back down and then listen to the war on the Fox Mike radio because we couldn't get there. There was over 60 Americans killed that night.
That'd be tough.
And it still torments you. You couldn't be. There was a set of guns that got there out of the 101st. They came up from the south and got there, and one of the crews up there got credit for some kills up there. Why couldn't it have been me?
Yeah.
But that's just the way it worked. So we were next morning we left, cleared up, and next morning, and I think the VC knew, what the weather's like. It's going to be limited how much support they can get.
Yep.
And so the next morning, my aircraft got tagged for another mission, and a couple of the pilots that I know went back out to Marianna. They flew body bags back and forth, or escorted for the body bags going back then. That one. There's a book written on that one. I think I've loaned it out, and I need to get it back because it was, when you're there and you're that close and you want to do more, but it's a good reminder of the way life happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was now this was in 70. Like I said, it's in 71. Vietnamization. We're turning this over to the Vietnamese. The American soldier. There was protests here, but there was protests there too. Memorial Day, down on the beach, Chu Lai, war protesters, soldiers. And everybody was careful, could be kind of politically correct, let them say their piece.
Yep.
And then they go back to their units. Well, so how much effort were they putting out when they was in the field?
Right.
We're leaving. I'm going to go out here and risk my life, and so it was an odd combination going on there, even in Vietnam. Most of them, a good share of them probably would have been draftees.
Yep.
Even if they'd have joined, they still could have been turned against. What we were trying to accomplish there.
So that probably caused a lot of division within units. Guys would protest, and then guys, you would have to trust that they would have your back or give their all, and you don't know if they were or not.
I was fortunate in that the platoon that I was in, there's a couple things we did. There was no drugs, and the crew chiefs and gunners were, the crew chiefs anyway, were handpicked by older crew chiefs.
Yep.
But they changed command every 6 months until we had a new commander, and he said, "Oh no, we're in charge. You're not HR.
This is how it's going to be.
This is how it works."
And he's right. It should have been his, but we started getting some that were doing smack, and one of them put at least 3 rounds in his helicopter, and shot the ammunition in the minigun as it was going down the tray, and so I kind of
not good for morale.
You kind of lost control.
Yep.
Of that. So there was drugs constantly that was going on. I'll tell you one thing about. Let me back up to when I was back in On-K. I had to do guard duty around our Cobra helicopters, and I was walking up there with 2 other guys, and the guy said, "Hey, you want a cigarette?" And so he'd rolled put tobacco in a regular cigarette, some kind of wacky tobacco, and I was just open-minded. We didn't have it in high school. Some of the guys coming back from college, start hearing about marijuana, but in high school, you never even thought of it, never even heard of it, and I was just open-minded to it because on the steel crew there was some that were involved probably, and so I said, "Well, yeah, I'll try one," and I puffed on it. The other guy, one of them left. The guy left, and then the other guy I was with, he said, "Well, I'm not going to finish mine." He said, "Well, I'll finish it," And then I had guard duty for 3 hours. And
longest 3 hours of
your. It kicked my butt. There was an ammo can next to the revetment, and I kept trying to get on it, And I said, I got to keep moving and kind of wear this stuff out if I can. And so I get up and I'm trying to walk to the helicopter, and I'm telling myself, slow down, you're going to run into it. I look down, my feet are barely shuffling. Yeah. And I was afraid the officer of the guard or the sergeant of the guard was going to show up, and I was going to be in serious trouble. Yep. And so I was just scared.
Yeah. Yep.
And 3 hours of that, and I got relieved, and you'd sleep for 3 and then go back on for 3. But second 3, I was
better shape,
buzzed, but I was okay.
So how many?
It scared me so much. That was the first and last experience.
Yeah.
Yep.
I bet.
I just plain swore off of that, and I drank a lot of beer, but
Yeah.
that was it. None of that. And I mean, I don't even like taking aspirin. I don't like anything that makes me feel funny.
Yeah.
You know, if I don't have to.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm glad for that experience that it scared me.
Yeah.
It had more sense than to try to live like that, you know.
So how many missions did you fly?
I don't have a count on it. You know, I talk to pilots and they know how many combat missions they flew and so forth. So, but I don't know. It depends on operations whether they keep track very well. I didn't keep any. Someplace there might have been records because we fill out a form, you know, and when you take off and that's where they come up with those numbers. But it never was ever brought down to me. I would say there was 5 months that I flew, so it could have easily been 3 to 4 combat type missions a week, probably.
Yeah.
It would have been a pretty good average.
And were they mostly like what was the most common? An LZ, coming to somebody's aid, escort? What was the most common type of mission, do you think?
Probably the combat assault missions, taking troops in, bringing troops out. Yeah. And we just flew gun cover for those for the most part. We would escort transport helicopters, the Sikorsky and or the Chinook, and they may be taking artillery pieces and putting them on a fire base, and we need to be there to fire gun cover for that. We did one where a Chinook had barrels of diesel fuel and detergent, and we're dropping them on an area of heavy vegetation where there'd been a lot of enemy activity. And then a little loach would drop down, throw an incinerator grenade, and then it would burn. And we'd burn out a whole area, maybe like a 5 acre, maybe 10 acre area. And our job was just to be there if something runs out, or if there's secondary explosions or a helicopter goes down or whatever. We were doing that one day. Those got to be kind of boring, but we were there doing one day. You could get RFVN radio and listen to the top 40 coming out of Saigon while you're flying around in a circle. That was a lot of fun. Yeah. It depended on the pilot whether he'd allow that, but most of them did. But there was a Chinook was coming, and of course, Mama San, Papa San's got their little huts and their rice paddies, and that's their little world, you know. And all they want to do is eat and enjoy life and sell a little produce, you know. They could care less about the war, except they got to pay the VC when they come around, a token in order to stay alive. Yep. And then be nice to us, you know. That's all they got. They just want to survive. They just want their little country. Anyway, the Chinook was coming, and all of a sudden you hear a radio call. A guy says, "Oops," and about a half a dozen barrels come rolling out of his net.
Oh boy!
Onto Mama San, Papa San's property, onto their rice paddy. And there was blood splattered around there. And of course, we were cheering because there was blood. And we flew over there, and it turned out that we'd hit their ducks.
Oh,
They had killed their ducks. And it wasn't no time at all. And someone was there from headquarters, was out there writing them a check.
Trying to make it right.
Yeah, trying to make that right.
Yep.
And I don't know, the pilot probably got in some trouble over that one. Another time, a guy might have gotten in some trouble too. The 71st gunships were just across the high-speed active from us, and their fire team came in, and we were just working on our helicopter, and all of a sudden you hear a whoosh, a rocket come shooting out of the tube. He hadn't disarmed. He'd gone through POL, flew down the active, parked, and hadn't de-armed the system. And when he hit the mic, he hit the trigger, and he shot a rocket off. And they have to go so fast before they'll arm. And this one hit a big old rock and didn't arm, but it glanced over and went out of sight over the drive over into a bivouac area, or housing, officer housing, actually.
Jeez.
It blew up in their tennis court.
Oh man.
And that guy's rotor blades had not stopped yet when the battalion commander was down there in his window screaming at him.
He was just shocked.
That was quite a sight.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet. I bet.
They had my aircraft only got hit 3 times that I know of, and we ended up getting new rotor blades because they were so far out of balance because they've been patched so many times. And so we never took any critical. I never took any critical rounds. I only had one engine failure, and we had been in some really rough country that morning. We was trying to find a tall white man that's with the VC, an American.
Yeah.
And we were looking for him, and we didn't find anything. We'd sat down at a fire base, went to take off again, and we got about as high as this barn, and the engine blew up. And we hit pretty hard. Smoke was rolling, but no fire. Spread the skids pretty bad.
Yep.
We secured the area. Chinook came out and was able to pick it up and haul it back to Chulai then for repairs. My gunner and I spent several days, and we got new skids put under it and fixed some damage. And the engine shop pulled the engine out. They were slow about getting the engine going again, and I was 12 days actually before they got it going. In the meantime, man, I can't just sit on the ground. And I asked a friend of mine that was flying the slicks if he needed a gunner, and he said, "Well, yeah, mine needs a day off. Why don't you come with me?" So I flew on the right door, and we transported some South Vietnamese Army out to a town down near My Lai. It's going to drop them in and make a couple trips down there, and that's all he's going to do. So I was glad to get in the air again and rode with him, and we're heading in toward this little town and little village, and the South Vietnamese, one of them was yanking on my jacket and pointing, and there was 12 NVA packs and weapons, uniformed NVA on the run. They were running out of the area as hard as they could go. I know they didn't know where to go because they'd have been in a spider hole if they were from around there, or they'd have been secured. So you always had to have permission from the aircraft commander to fire, unless you had pre-approval. And so right away I told him I got 12 NVA packs and weapons on the run, 9 o'clock. And he looked real quick and got on the radio, and he calls command helicopter who was overseeing this whole mission. And he says, wait one, I'll call intelligence. So he calls Chu Lai for intelligence. And the word came back pretty quick. Hold your fire. There's no confirmed reports of enemy activity in the area.
Oh, no kid.
Let the South Vietnamese check it out. Well, the South Vietnamese, one of them had a burlap bag or net bag with a bunch of either ducks or chickens, one or the other, in it. Well, they could care less. They're going for a picnic.
Yeah.
They're going for a barbecue.
Yeah.
They're not going to go looking for the bad guys.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gave me a hint that this thing isn't working like it should.
Yep.
Why aren't we allowed to do what
Engage.
needs done? We have gunships out there. Can the gunships go check it out?
Yep.
Perhaps you could go over and get them to take a shot at you.
Yeah.
You know, then you can let it go. But that wasn't an isolated incident. You always had to have permission from the aircraft commander. The only way I could find around it was sometimes you could thump your heel on the floor and make it sound like you were taking hits.
Yeah.
The other way was I had an AK-47. Actually, my gunner did. I had an AK-50. It was a wire stock, and with 3,000 rounds of Chinese ammunition, I could fire off 2 or 3 rounds of that when they'd go cack, cack, cack. Are we taking fire? And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's what you had to do.
Yeah.
If you were convinced
That there was something going
needed
on.
Done
Yeah.
with that. I got one pertinent story here. So one of the missions was we were at a fire base. It wasn't even a fire base. It was a rearm, refuel location about 15, 20 minutes out of Chulai. And we stopped there, and we were waiting for orders for the rest of the day. It was getting late in the afternoon. And up onto the runway, and they had one of the metal PSP runways.
Yep.
Here comes Cecil Parsons, my buddy from basic training.
Yep.
And he says, well, I need a ride back to Chulai. And he was getting close to processing out, and he needed to get back. And I said, well, we can't take passengers. I said, we're loaded, with armament and fuel, and we're just limited. And he said, boy, I sure need to get back. There wasn't any other slicks or any other aircraft around. So, well, let me ask the pilot. So I asked the pilot, and he said, well, yeah, if we've got a long enough runway. We can get transitional lift. We can get off the ground. We'll burn some fuel off, and we'll be okay. Time we get to Chulai to land. So sure enough, the orders come. We're going back straight to Chulai, done for the day. And so Cecil gets in, and I had an extra helmet. I had a Y cord. Always kept that around in case I had radio troubles and somebody come to work on it. He sat on my footlocker, which was full of gun parts and helicopter parts, and between my gunner and I. So we're heading back, and we hadn't been on the air 10 minutes, and we get the radio call from operations. They says we got an aircraft shot down, or we had an aircraft down. I don't remember why it was down, but they had an aircraft down, and Chinook trying to pick it up, and they're taking sniper fire. Any gunships in the area? And that pilot turned around, looked at me, and just shook his head. Here we got a passenger.
Yep.
That's kind of like going from an 80,000 pound load of grain to 90,000. There's a difference.
Yeah.
When you go to take off. So here we got the slug riding with us in here, but it's probably not so bad. We burned some gas off, So we get out there, and sure enough, there's a Chinook. He's off to the side, and there's some guys on the ground around the helicopter. They're taking sniper fire from this hillside, and so lead helicopter rolls in, and door gunner fires, and I come in trail, and I'm just kind of like spraying the hillside because you don't see any enemy, so you're just shooting it up. And the second pass around, I felt something on my shoulder, and I look, and here's Cecil. He's trying to see out there where he's trying to see what I'm shooting at. And the third round, I hand him my AK-50.
Say,
both of us are shooting on the third time around. And I don't know, we made a few passes then, and in the meantime, the Chinook got a hold of that helicopter, got the guys off the ground, and they D'd him out, and it was a successful day. We got out of there. And I know it sounds like a war story of some kind. But anyway, we get back then and drop Cecil off, and he said, well, that was something. And I hadn't seen him since. We had both extended, so we'd come home the same day. And he wasn't around when I processed out, and I never did see him, so I didn't know how he got home. His name wasn't on the wall, so I figured he made it, Couldn't remember the town he lived in or anything. But I did find him, it's been 7-8 years ago, down in Missouri.
Okay.
And he's not just an old hillbilly. He's been very successful. And he married right, and buying and selling nursing homes and salvage yards and farms. And so he's done real well, but he has a little post-traumatic stress.
Yep.
I think it's from that helicopter.
From that helicopter ride. Yeah.
I think that put him over the edge.
Yeah. Might have. Yeah, you were a little more callous than he was when you just jump in.
It was just another day.
Did you get to the point where you were sleeping on the way to a mission? After a while, were you like that?
Not terribly. We flew kind of high, and so it was you felt pretty comfortable when you're going out, but that kind of attitude probably still had. Yeah, can't wait to get there. But I enjoyed the countryside and enjoyed the view and enjoyed the flying. So there were several types of missions, and I actually started. I actually wrote a couple chapters, which would be like a book. And I hadn't even got into missions yet. One whole chapter is just the first mission, and it's all the sights and sounds and vibrations and G-forces and smells and the adrenaline and the fear, the lack of fear. All of that wrapped into one first day out. Yeah. And after that, I was hooked after that first day anyhow. And one chapter was just on my decision to go in the gun platoon. And it's a pretty patriotic one, and it's a loss of friends too. Al wasn't the first one we'd lost. We lost two good friends in the first unit I was in. They were shot down in the Hunter Killer in the Little Loach. Or they was in the 58, I guess, and rescued, and the helicopter was cracked up, but they got it out too. And a week later, probably no more than a week, the same two were on the similar mission, both of them shot down by machine gun and killed. You talk about balls. Those guys were my heroes. To face death like that and then go back at it.
Yep.
And that's what I want. Yeah. It was kind of my feelings there. I didn't learn until I was leaving Vietnam that my good friend from AIT, from the advanced training, Shorty Blackman, was killed also. It made me glad that I flew what I did and did what I did. And he was just working on a flight line with two other guys on it, and had a rocket attack, and he was killed instantly, and the other two guys lingered for a couple of days, from what I've read on it. I extended an extra 30 days over the 12-month required, so that when I got home, when I returned, I would automatically be discharged.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would have had to gone 6 months to some other base someplace, or probably a month leave, and then off to somewhere else. And so I thought, well, I've done my time. I feel like I'll do my 30 days and be done. A lot of guys would quit flying 30 days out just for safety reasons.
Yep.
And I flew to the last day. We had a little action the last day. There was a patrol on a road, and there was some VC up on a hillside, and it could have very well been setting up a little ambush. And I threw a smoke grenade down a spider hole where they were, where I saw them, and then we rolled in with rockets, and that concluded my last day. We flew back home. I cleaned up. We must have had some action that day, because I remember cleaning my machine gun. My gunner and I turned it in the arms room, went up to our hooch, and we had a couple of beers. The guys gave me a plaque and a attaboy, and the next day I went down. A platoon sergeant took me down to the terminal. There's a little terminal there, and where the guys would process in and out of Chulai, and ran into a guy that I was in basic training with from early Iowa. And we processed together and flew back to Omaha together then. And so 3 days later, I always said I'd have to do the math, but it was awful close to that. I'm sitting at home in my old bedroom on the north side of the house, facing the barn lot and the hogs and the chicken house, and I'm sitting there, and the sun's coming up, and I'm hearing the neighbor's rooster crowing, and it was over.
Just changed like that.
And it was too fast.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I probably should have done that 6 months someplace, and been with other veterans.
Gotten that transition.
And wound down some. Yeah. Nowadays, when you get out, there's a little more of a transition, and counseling, and here's what could happen, but not then. You was on your own, and that wasn't so bad. There was a shock. I didn't really have any real direction yet. And what went through my mind was the guys that are still there, they're grabbing their machine gun, they're going out and doing the same thing again today.
Yep.
But I couldn't find much in the newspapers. The World Herald, and what there was negative by then, in 71.
Yep. And
the folks just didn't ask any questions. It started actually when we came into when Paul and I were waiting at Seattle-Tacoma to get on an airplane to come to Omaha. We were fogged in, and so there wasn't any. There were some empty corridors there, and you just had to find a place to sack out for the night and catch a plane the next day because it was fogged. And we were just walking down a quiet corridor, and an announcement came over the PA. It came as a boom, and both of us looked at each other because we were on the ground.
Yep.
Looking at one another. I did that for a long time, and I wasn't in the bush.
Yeah.
But you get rocket attacks, and you just react, But anyway, we got to Omaha, and we come down the ramp, and Pam, my wife, girlfriend then, was there with her mother and to meet us, and Paul's folks were there. And I hadn't noticed it, but my wife told me about it. She said there was a lady at the bottom of the stairs with her 2 young children. And as we come down, she hustles her kids around to protect them. I'm a vicious baby killer,
Yeah.
Yep.
And her mother, they hung out sometimes down at Andy and Ruby's down South Omaha, and we went down there, and his son-in-law, or not son-in-law, but here's Pam's boyfriend. He's just back from Vietnam, and it was just complacent. You know, there wasn't no questions asked. It was like people just turned back to what they were doing, except for one guy. He was putting a hit on Pam, a little strong, and disrespected me.
Yeah.
They made us fly home in your uniform.
Yeah.
So it was obvious. And I probably should have poked him, I suppose, but you're just glad to be home, you know?
Right.
And then we went to a small town, Pam's, where she went to high school, and some of her friends were at a house, and they were having a party, and no one was mean or cruel, but there was acknowledgement that, yeah, Gary's back, but that was it. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I was expecting more than that.
Right.
But it got worse. I went to, that same week, we borrowed a folks' car, and Pam and I went down to my hometown, and the guys were just coming, and they were just getting out of National Guard, and they were going across the park, and it's dark, and I stopped, and they said, "Well, Roberts, I haven't seen you for a long time. Where you been?" And I said, "Well, I was pretty proud of myself. I just got back from Vietnam." And they said, "Well, you dumbass. Why the blank did you do that? You know, you could have joined the National Guard. You could have gone to Canada. You didn't have to go over there." I was shocked by that.
Yeah.
So that same week, or early the next week, I went with my brother was in Blair, Nebraska. He worked on Harvester silos, and I went and spent a couple of days with him, and we did some service work, and that night we stopped at a bar, and he says, "Bartender, bring me a couple beers." I said, "My brother just got home from Vietnam." I was standing at the end of a bar, and there were two people, a man and a woman, sitting on stools. My brother was between me and them, and I was just looking down toward the bartender, and I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, and I looked, and my brother caught this guy's fist in his hand. Had words with him, and that guy left then. But he was gonna slug me upside the head just because
You'd served.
I served. I came back from Vietnam. I was shocked by that. Dave was fine. He was real supportive, and so was Pam. She was my biggest supporter. But and my brother had been in the Army, and he was no, there was no problem there. But I got and I thought to myself, driving back, it was a couple hours back, I thought I just need to go back to work. I was building steel buildings before, and I was comfortable with that, and I just need to keep busy.
Yep.
So I go back to work, and the guys were talking and smack and different things, and I said, "Well, when I was in Vietnam, I got shut the hell up. Nobody here wants to hear."
The two worst things that could have happened to you is one, having that mindset that I just need to get busy. Like, I just need to get busy.
Yeah.
And just push it all down. And then
Right.
two, not having anybody to talk to about it and nobody wanting to hear you.
Right.
That's the worst. I mean, for anybody, people that have gone through anything, it helps to be able to talk about it. And when you're constantly surrounded by people that don't want to hear what you have to say.
Pam would listen, but there was a limit.
Yeah.
To what she could even absorb. So that was in September, and I'd gone back to work. I hung my field jacket up, and I quit talking.
Yep.
Nobody cares. And you would think Christmas, you missed Christmas the year before. I'm 21 now, finally. And you would think you'd want to be home for Christmas. I was had a little apartment in Atlantic, little 2-room shack up there, and it's close to work, and Pam wanted to go with family, and I said, "You go ahead." I said, I'm not going to go.
Yeah.
And I went down the back door, just a couple blocks away, to one of the taverns there in Atlantic. There weren't very many people there at all, of course, Christmas Eve. And I had a handful of quarters and some dollar bills, and I just went from the bar to the payphone.
Yep.
Had my little address book. Kind of knew who might already be home, trying to make contact
Yep.
with somebody familiar.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I didn't get any answers. It didn't work out. I didn't get a hold of anybody. The operator probably got tired. It wouldn't be the same operator, but if she would have, she got tired of me. I said, well, check this name, in this town. And so I spent the night at Christmas Eve there, and then stumbled back to my apartment and crashed. And I guess I had I probably had a little attitude, but I just needed to talk. I wanted to go back at that moment. If I could have gone placed right back where I left,
I was going to ask you that.
That's where I wanted to go.
Because that was the thought that was going through your head. You just wanted to.
Now, fast forward, when the boys, my two boys Micah went to Iraq and Afghanistan, and then both of them were in Afghanistan together at the same time, doing a little bit different things, but they were together, got together once in a while. When they came home, we threw a party up at the Kelowna Park, and I bought food, and we had music and patriotic songs. I came in I borrowed a golf cart from Yachty, camouflage, and we come rolling in with Corey and Micah, and I said, fresh out of Kandahar, Afghanistan. Well, Corey was all about it. He likes to be up front. He wants people to see him. Micah, not so much. So I didn't do much. I didn't do that. And I told him that a lot of people have been talking about you. They've been praying for you, and they want to see you. And I said, it's just an opportunity. I said, I'd like to see you come.
Yeah.
And the truth is, I was doing it for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wanted them to have a point in time they could look back and say, all my friends, acquaintances showed up.
Yeah.
And welcomed me home.
Yep.
Give me an attaboy. It was a different situation, coming back out of Afghanistan. It's way before the failure, but
right.
You wanted them to feel what you didn't feel when you came home.
Yeah, I didn't. It wasn't anything like that Never was. Now I kind of hold a grudge about that. And the people that should have and would have, a lot of them aren't alive now. Yeah. Or they're my age.
Right. Yeah.
But younger guys, they ask questions. They want to know. It was a tough time. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
I went to Governor Reynolds' Harvest Festival fundraiser a couple of weeks ago. Riley Gaines was there.
Yep.
That was good.
Awesome lady.
That was awesome. But Pam was ill, and so she didn't go, and I already spent money for the ticket, so I'm going.
Yep.
And there's one kid, one fella, a young guy sitting at a table by himself, and I said, anybody sitting here? And he was a freshman law student this will give you hope in America. He was a freshman law student from California that came to Drake, Iowa. Drake came to Iowa, hoped to get a well-rounded education.
Because he knew
I know what I'm going to get. I know what I'm going to get in California.
Yeah.
And as we talked about that I'd been in Vietnam, and he asked questions about that.
Yep.
His mother came out in 1974 with the airlift.
Oh yeah.
Out of Vietnam. And he said she is so thankful for the American soldier. If they hadn't have done what they did, there'd have been a lot more countries had fallen. Yeah. And she would not have had an opportunity to get out. Yep. So that was really a small world, and that was glad we ran into him.
In the aftermath of that, how much time do you feel passed before you were able to, I guess, move on from that, not have that twinge of resentment?
I moved. Kept her tamped down for a long time.
Yeah.
in 1975, on Easter Sunday, I had known the gospel, but I trusted Christ as my Savior on that Easter Sunday, and it changed my life. It changed my thinking, and my patience and understanding and so forth. So that was a major thing that just made me go on.
Yep.
But a period of time after that, I'm going to say maybe this would have been 5 years later. I read a book called Chicken Hawk by Robert Mason. He was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and I was just where I would start reading those. And I could relate to it because he flew different kinds of helicopters, but I could relate to it, the stories that he had. When it got to the last chapter, it all came back again. He went through the same thing.
Yep.
Well, and I said, I'm not alone. I never was much for joining anything. I wasn't going to go to any groups and sit around and whine and complain. And I'm not complaining now. I'm just telling you, this is just the way it was.
Yeah.
And if there's anyone at fault, it's our congressman that continued the fallacy.
Yeah.
You know, if there's any fault, and look what it did to a generation of soldiers. They try to make up for it now. After 9/11, they would have rallies for all veterans.
Yeah.
I didn't fall for that.
Yeah.
No, you had your chance. You
Yeah.
should have done right. You should have done right previous.
Yep.
But I read Chicken Hawk and maybe realized I wasn't alone. For the first time, I realized I'm not alone.
Yep.
And there's 2 million of us.
Yep.
Not all of them have the same experience.
Right.
And I think many of them had this, and they handle it different.
Yep.
You know, it has to do with your own upbringing, and a lot of things enter into how you handle different things and what you did, maybe what you saw. There wasn't anything that I did that I'm ashamed of in Vietnam. I don't really have any sleepless nights over Vietnam.
Right.
I do once I got home.
Yeah. The treatment you received.
The treatment. That lingered on for a long time. 15 or 16 years later, I took the boys to an air show, and they had a gunship helicopter there. And I thought, well, I didn't know they had those in Iowa. They're based out of Waterloo.
Yep.
And in fact, one of them that was in our platoon of 8 there, one of them was up there. And talked to the recruiter.
Yep.
And I did the math, and I said, well, I got enough time to retire out of the Guard.
Yep.
I said, so I did a try one. I said, sign me up for 1 year. And I went to Boone, and I thought I'd go as a crew chief. Well, I went as a mechanic.
Yep.
But it was fine. I got to fly quite a bit.
Yep.
And I went for 1 year, and then I just kept re-upping and until I retired in 2006. So in 2001, they had they had some buildings blew up in New York.
Yep.
And I remember the day and the place I was at, and somebody asked me, well, you think your Guard unit will go? I said, not. It'd have to be a long, protracted war before they'd ever call us. Well, less than 30 days later, we got the call.
Yep.
I was working on an 8760 and trying to put it together and working some overtime, and the phone rang, and they said, bring your stuff. Be in Boone tomorrow morning. I plan to be gone for at least a year, maybe 2. And,
wow.
And I wasn't ready for all that.
I bet not.
We kind of had a hint that we always need to be ready. So some things were in, not everything was in place. I actually got an extra 24 hours, and Pam and I was able to put some other things together, and and then I went. We didn't go, so the unit mobilized. We went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky with the 160th Special Ops Helicopter Regiment.
Yep.
They were doing missions in Afghanistan at the time, and the major maintenance was done in Fort Campbell, and they were short mechanics.
Yep.
And so they flew them back and forth for major work, and we were down in Fort Campbell for a year then.
Wow.
And one positive thing was close enough close enough. If you had a long weekend, you could come home, or the wife would come down there, and so there was a lot of that back and forth, and it was and everywhere you went, thank you.
Yep. That help you heal a little bit, or
did it open past feelings?
There was so much familiarity with the aircraft maintenance world. It was like being back in Vietnam in times, and so yeah, I think if there's any feelings that I'm hanging on to, I'm doing that myself.
Yeah,
I'm just being stubborn about that.
Yeah,
you know,
you're entitled to that.
Yeah, I think that's what's happened there. So we were a year, and I hated it because they were leaving work. Well, when I came back, I was working the repower tractors. Well, that had slowed up, so then they joined vehicle maintenance and the repower under one manager. And and I came back, I did do a tractor because they only had a couple there, and then I worked on I was their forklift mechanic, and 90 days later we got called again. The owner, John, says, "Can they do that?" I said, "Well, they did."
Yeah.
Well, this time we were going to go with the 101st and invade Iraq. So we geared up and prepared for the desert and packed our bags 3 times and then unpacked them 3 times. Turkey wouldn't let us bring troops down from the north, which where we were scheduled to go.
Yep.
And so that held us up. So we were at Camp Atterbury for literally months, trained up and ready to go, and no place to go. And there's a lot worse things in work than in the world than having to get up in the morning and having to go to work, and that's getting up and having no responsibilities and no place to go.
Yeah, and not knowing.
Oh, and that was hard. They still were going to coming up with a mission for us. We were still going to go. I was looking for my homecoming. Yeah, I want to go because I want that homecoming.
Yeah.
And it got nixed. We ended up back at Fort Campbell I had a little different job, but doing the same thing we did before back at Fort Campbell. No overseas for you. And I was disappointed about that because I need my homecoming. But with Pam's encouragement and my own want to too, I took advantage of being back down there. Austin P has a college on post. I went nights. I took advanced auto technology classes.
Yep.
And got 12 college credit hours. I studied for the Automotive Service Excellence exams. The Army paid for 2. I bought the others and passed all 8 of them. Became a master truck technician.
Nice.
I was a technical inspector inspecting people's work on the helicopters, which was mostly paperwork. So I was a lot of computer work. So when we came back after the second year, there was an opening for production supervisor for vehicle maintenance and the repower. I was a shoe-in. Yeah. And I did that for 10 years and then retired out of the Guard and continued with that. So I took advantage. What was a negative, staying home, turned into a big advantage. You can't do all that stuff.
No.
Working on helicopters out in the desert,
Yeah, right.
So I just took advantage of it then.
Well, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about that whole business when you ended up going to work for Kinsey. So where did that come from? How did you end up working for Kinsey Manufacturing?
I'll tell you just in a nutshell, in 70, I was home from Vietnam. When I was home from Vietnam, I went back to work at steel buildings again. I did that for about a year, and I had a crew there. And then the talk was always, well, when you get older, you're not going to be able to do this. Well, that already started in when I was pretty young thinking about that,
Yep.
So I went to Iowa Western Community College, took aircraft maintenance.
Yep.
And worked on getting my A&P to work on aircraft. And toward the end of that, when I was finishing up, I still had this urge to go back to the farm, even as negative as a lot of it was. And Dad encouraged it, and so I bought in and on a contract and we moved back to the farm. low hog prices, 35 bushel to acre drought.
Yep.
Work day and night, home one night in a year before dark.
Yep.
Living on food stamps and no means of other work for income.
Yep.
I said, no, 1 year, that was enough for me.
Yep.
And so I had some mechanical knowledge and experience and training. And my wife's dad managed a farm repair shop in Grant and on a large farm. And I got on with him and I was there for 5 years. We were interested in getting our children, and I don't think Corey was in school yet. Maybe he was getting close. He's getting close. Daughter was in younger grades, and getting them a Bible-based education, Christian education, and there was a school. There was a school in Knoxville we were interested in moving to. I look in the Omaha World Herald, and here's a guy looking for a truck mechanic, should have Detroit diesel experience, Yep. And had that, and I called him. I said, well, first thing I asked him was, how far are you from Knoxville? 12 miles. Okay, good. And had other opportunity but I went there and was there for 10 years. And so he sold drainage tile, delivered drainage tile. So we had trucks and trailers, lots of acres that he farmed, fed cattle. His dad was killed in a tractor accident, inherited a grain elevator. So we had fertilizer and grain and on, and just grain trucks. And so
Not Smith, is it? Okay.
No, he's south. He's still in business too.
Yeah.
But he, so I was there 10 years, and then he was going to cut back to what he and his boy can handle, and I was probably costing him too much, I suppose. But I was making good money, but I wasn't saving anything, and I need to do something different. We'd started going to church over in this area, and I wanted to get over in this side of the state anyway, but I wasn't going to settle for anything. I wasn't going to go work at Modine's.
Right.
And I look in the paper, and here Kinsey was looking for a engine installer. And so I come up and interviewed almost all day, spent the day with John, and then a few days later I was up here working. So I started in January 1990 working we were repowering the John Deere four-wheel drive tractors, 8630, 8640 at that time.
How big of an operation was it at that point?
There was it was only in the second. Well, it was only about a year old then. 12 tractors had been done.
Okay. Yeah.
When I started, and so there was just maybe a painter and one mechanic, and Jim managed it.
Yeah.
So at the time, and then I started. They hired me and an engine guy. An engine guy was rebuilding engines.
Yep.
And we were in John's personal shop at his farm.
Yep.
And later that summer, he moved to the plant, and we got a little more room. And then later on, we got expanded a little more room until there was 5 or 6 tractors being done at a time.
Yeah.
Later on, we also had a major change. They have a Series 1, Series 2. Series 2's has just a lot different tractor, a lot handier to work on, a lot simpler.
Yeah.
And we developed that while I was there, as well as taking on the 8850 at the same time.
Yep.
I did the 8850 then too.
Yep.
So, but I did that to clear up until I was called up the National Guard, and it had started slowing down some because the tractors are getting older, and they don't have the hydraulic systems that newer tractors do, and so there was some downsides that, but they're simple, and the guys that have them just love them because they can put anybody in them. And there's no computers.
Yeah.
And they just run and run and run. We were going from a 275 horse, like an 8630 or 40, and 360 horse was the small engine, and 400 was an option.
Yep.
And then the 8850s, we put a 5 1/4 on a few tractors, special order, but 400 was a standard, and 450 horse was what most of them asked for.
Yeah.
And they get good power out of those.
Yeah. And
the rest of the tractor was holding up good to them. There's about 600 done altogether. 2007 would have been, I was managed, when I took over as production supervisor in vehicle maintenance, they had a manager. And and he was doing parts. Well, then they hired a parts guy, and then that manager disappeared. And so it's like the transport hasn't been here for a while, and there's no fuel in the barrels. So somebody needs to order some fuel.
Yep.
Well, I guess that's me. And we need some parts for these repower tractors. I said, well, I guess I'll order them. And so I ended up doing all that the manager was doing. But that's how you do it without having to raise your pay. You just give you more responsibility.
Yep, that's right.
And I just hung in. So it was probably the best, to me, it was the best 10 years that I spent at Kinsey's, was because I worked with each department. And when they had material handling issues or problems, I'd look for solutions. Yep. and try to be, as efficient as we could be. John let me buy a lot of equipment, got his blessing on that as I went. Yep. He watched some of the projects that we did, because we did some repower. I did some repowers afterwards that were beyond after it was supposed to have been done. Yep. And he saw what was being done and the progress that was being done. And I think he was watching me all along. So that when I got near retirement, he says, I had an opportunity to go back over to his shop and manage his antique tractor collection.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, how big is that collection? Do you know?
John never talks about he never puts a number on it.
Yeah.
So I'm reluctant to, but it's several hundred.
Yeah, it's amazing.
If you ever manage to get on a tour, and if you want to count them, you're just welcome to. But nobody has ever completely got them counted.
Yeah.
For sure. But there's several hundred.
Yeah, it's an incredible.
IH, a lot of IH tractors, that was his favorite. And so it's like you got all the H farmalls, 1939 to 54. So we got one for each year, and then there's some variations in there.
Yeah.
So there's extras. Same thing with the M's, and then when you get down to the 100 series or the 50s or the 560s and that, not necessarily one for each year beyond that. But there's John Deere's and AC's and Oliver's and Minneapolis Molines and it just goes on.
Some really neat stuff.
Several cars and trucks. A lot of what would be like old grain trucks, like a 29 International delivery truck. Mm-hmm. It's kind of neat. A couple Impalas with 409s. Yep. 62 and a 63, one's convertible, 3 Corvettes, several pickups in there, combines, cotton pickers, packers.
Just whatever he liked.
Whatever John likes.
Yeah.
And whatever, it'd be interesting. A lot of miniatures, too. And there's so many that are stacked too high.
Yeah.
In some buildings, I tried to count in one building how many was up on top, and I got all that time.
Yeah.
So
you managed.
I walked through them, and I enjoy them. I don't know what the oldest International is. I'd have to go back and look, but it'd be pretty old. I'm probably on steel, maybe something like an F12, I suppose. But a 1586 would be the latest one.
Yeah.
So it's kind of newer. And in a John Deere 4455 is probably the newest.
Yeah.
That's in there. And he doesn't have like one for each of the 55 series, or he'd really have something.
Yeah, right.
But that one was low hours, so he kept it. There's a 4440 with 50 hours.
That's amazing.
I saw when he bought it, it would have been an annual income for most people.
Yeah.
It's doubled that. There's an 8010 was the first, John Deere was the first articulating commercial 4-wheel drive that John Deere put out. It had a Detroit diesel 6-cylinder in it.
Yep.
They had transmission issues. They had only built 100 of them. They brought them all back in. There's one that didn't come back in, but anyway, most of them all came back in. They were put back out as 8020s. Got a new tractor now, a new model.
Yep.
And so there was 100 of those, and that one is really valuable too. And it's a sweet tractor. It runs good. We took the cab. He don't like the cab on it. He took the cab off. It's painted and up on the shelf. It could go back on.
Amazing.
But I like the cabs on it. He told me what one sold for on auction, and I said, well, the problem is if you sell it, then you don't have it.
Yep, that's right. Yep, that's absolutely right.
So we start those once a year, at least once a year, and run them long enough to get the hydraulic pressure up and oil pressure, and try to get oil up to the valve train and so forth. And and then I make notes if I got issues, maybe a water pump bearing or a little leak or an ignition problem or carburation problem or something. And then I'll go back and I work those off, and that's what I'm doing now. Yeah. Twice a year there are scheduled tours, like next spring in May. There'll be 2 days. We don't do it as many as we used to. About 60 on each tour. You tour in the morning, tour in the afternoon, and then you flip flop. You tour the plant or you tour the barn, so that you flip and do that for 2 days. Waiting list is at least 2 years. That'd be a minimum. It may be close to 3. You just call Judy at the front desk, and she puts your name on the list and contact and how many you want to bring. So spring and fall we do that. Next March, I suspect Gathering of the Green will have their convention in Davenport. They're going to want to. They usually bring 2 bus loads over, so they'll do a morning and afternoon, probably about 50. That one sells out. That one actually sells out. We don't charge anything for it, but they Gathering of the Green feeds them.
Yeah.
So there's a charge for that, I think. Yeah. So, but it sells out real quick.
Oh yeah,
out there. Sure. Now we could do more tours. Sometimes a tractor tour, like an AC guys, were having a deal up in Manna last year, and they came down one day and went through.
Yeah.
To me, it's a promotion in the sense that if you're doing the tractor and plant tour, it's marketing.
Sure.
And so that, but other than that, it's just because John wanted these tractors and he's got them. You turn cash into iron, and then you turn around and turn iron into cash. So
well, I think it's pretty cool that your whole life you've kind of took this mechanical mind of yours and you've made a complete career out of it, and you kind of came back a little bit. Now you're kind of you're in ag, you're still in the ag sector. And that
was my goal, especially when we were in Pleasantville. I always said, and I told the guy I worked for there, I told him in this last year, I said, I tell people this is the best job I ever had, because he turned me loose. He got me a service truck and a welder and a boom and a spot in the shop, and we did customer work when we could, and he knew how to get work out of me, and I don't even know if he knew he was doing this, but he would say, so I don't know, how do you figure that stuff out? Yeah. Play me up a little bit. He worked me.
Yep.
And he said, he told me one time, he said, I like having you around because when I'm gone, because he'd have to go try to collect for tile and sell tile and that. And he says, when I'm gone, I know you're getting the job done. Yep. And I always tried to do it to please him. He'd have to make me go home at night, have a salary, and I just worked all the time. Yep. But I enjoyed working there. But every place I'd been built on the next, so that where I'm at now, I can be comfortable. My goal when I left that job at Pleasantville and I was looking for a job then, I went to a pastor friend of mine in town. And I says, I know I got to. Our family was split up for a while because Pam had them where they could be in a Christian school, so we were living separate except weekends. And that wasn't a good situation. I said, I need to get it back together. I don't want to give this job up. And I said, I don't know what to do. And he said, you need to write down on a piece of paper what your goals are. And I wanted a farm-related job, ag-related job, and I want a place that has a retirement program so I can get started on that of some kind. And the other was a church that I could be active in. Yeah. And so, man, there it was right in the Des Moines Register, the want ads. Well, they don't use want ads anymore. Yeah. It'd have been elsewhere. Yeah. But they were right there. And the other goal I had, I watched my aunts and uncles, not my folks so much because they worked. I know Dad farmed because he wanted to until he couldn't. And Mom worked she worked 29 years as a cook. The year that we had to bail out because we were starving to death down on the farm, she went to work at the nursing home in town as a cook. She worked 29 years. Well, she wanted to get off the farm more, I think. It was a life outside of just being there on the farm. So she enjoyed doing that. And my goal, but I seen aunts and uncles that were, my age now in their 70s looking for work because the Social Security wasn't going far enough for them. Yep. And they needed money. Yep. And my goal was to be able to work because I want to, not because I have to. Yep. I don't have any hobbies except work.
Yep.
And when I'm not working, I'm working part-time. There's hardly a year that's passed that I haven't worked on somebody's combine or ran their combine or got their corn planter ready, because I enjoy doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make some money at it, but you can do other things too. But I enjoy doing it because that's me. You're probably gonna, at some point, you may have heard of Farm Rescue. I just heard about them maybe in the middle of the summer through a podcast, and then I researched it a little bit. And I spent a week here in the first part of October and worked. It was a solid week. Started Monday and didn't get home till Sunday night. And 3 volunteers and 1 field manager, and we took out 500 acres for a farmer that was having cancer surgery. Couldn't get his own crop out. Needed help, and I think we're helping to save that farmer's farm. Mm-hmm. Because somebody had to do it. Yeah. On Saturday, neighbors came because they had time off. Most of them are working nowadays, most farmers. They had time off, and that was great. They came and helped. We had a guy stop by, and he says, anything we can do to help? Well, we sure could use another semi. Well, I got one. I just got to find me a driver. The driver volunteered his time, and he helped. So it's that kind of mentality. You talk about unity in the ag business, and that farm focus pulls that all together. Mm-hmm. And I did that for a week, and to me, that was the highlight of this year.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Farm Rescue is awesome. We're going to have...
I said Farm Focus, but Farm Rescue.
Yeah, no, we're going to have them on, I think, I don't know for sure when, but upcoming, we're going to talk all about it.
Yeah, we need to know more about them because they've been in the northern states, and they're getting more used more now through the Corn Belt. And if there's a need, they can help us, we want to do it. I'll throw this in. I don't think I told you this. We had stopped at a store to get some batteries because our walkie-talkies, when we came out of the field, us 3 volunteers, and we all had our Farm Rescue hats on and maybe a jacket or 2. And this kid behind the counter, a new generation, he says, "What's Farm Rescue?" Well, it's a nonprofit organization that helps farm families in crisis. And we're helping to get a farmer's crops out because he's having cancer surgery. And he says, I don't agree with that. The government should be doing that.
What the hell?
We all stepped back. We just couldn't believe it,
Yep.
And the guy that was buying the batteries, one of the other volunteers, he says, you're not going to find the government doing this job.
Yeah.
He says, well, they should be doing it. Somebody shouldn't be making $1 billion coming in here and taking that guy's crops out. Well, this is nonprofit. Nobody's making $1 million anywhere on this deal,
Yeah.
But to me, it's a mentality of a different generation. I would imagine if I would have asked him, I said, "Do you believe in a guaranteed national income?"
100%.
Yeah, I think it's that woke. It's that woke mentality. I'm afraid. Yeah. I feel, and he was real bold about it. And that's a thing that really kind of shocked us. So we were still talking about it the next day. We couldn't believe it. And these guys were both from out of state. The other 2 volunteers. I hope they don't think we're all like that, but they're everywhere. No, hey, if we got them in the cornfields, Iowa, we're in a world of hurt that way.
Yeah.
So,
well, Gary, I really, truly appreciate you spending the time sit down with us. Great story. And thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for your service. And I have trouble putting into words, I guess. I think as a country, we've gone through a time where I feel like we've lost our way a little bit. But I will say, I feel like one of the few things left that, for the most part, I know there's exceptions to this, but for the most part, I think one of the few things left in this country that I find, at least, and I hope this is true, I hope it's not just my feeling, that we can agree on, we can come together about, is the appreciation we have for our veterans. We don't have much appreciation for our politicians anymore. We don't have a lot of trust. But I feel like as a nation, we can all be thankful and we can all appreciate the sacrifice that people have given and continue to give. And on Veterans Day, I thank you for your service, and I thank all the veterans for theirs.
I will second that. Thank you. It was a great episode. I hope you guys got a lot of value from it. I hope this just shows a little bit of different perspective how it was back then, and just shows you that you got it pretty good. We got it pretty good here in America, and count your blessings and be grateful for what you got, and pay the fee and thank a veteran today. Pay the fee and thank a veteran today. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you again, Gary, and we'll see you back here next week for another episode.